So something that not everybody knows about me, I'm a firefighter by trade. That's what I did for many years of my life, but I've always had an entrepreneurial bent since I was a little kid. My first business wasn't Sterling Lighting, and I still own it, but it is a public health pest control company. That's where I first ran into the challenges of scaling a business. When I talk about it, I try to talk about like how do you scale without losing your soul, because it's probably one of the more stressful things that you can go through as a business owner. When I think about that experience, it's like I still run the business. I have management in place, and they oversee day-to-day operations. So it's like my full-time role now is transitioned to Sterling as COO. But in my mosquito control company, we have 26 trucks, 28 with a couple of reserve trucks, and a couple of locations. It's run. It goes pretty smooth now. We've worked out a lot of the kinks over the years, but there was a time when I first started when it was just me. I answered the phones, I did the books, I did the marketing, I did everything. The first challenge of scaling is like, did it all myself in the first year. But my first challenge was like making that first hire. And I can't tell you like the challenge I had in trying to find somebody that could come alongside me and help, not knowing which things to divest and continue doing myself and then which things to pass off. But the problem is like, and this is the scaling issue, is like, you're still growing and you don't have either the people, you don't have the systems, or you don't have the processes in place to really be able to handle it. And so you end up starting to misallocate your time and go, oh, well, I need more people to do the work, when in fact you really needed a new system. Or, you think, hey, I need a new system, and you really just don't, and you have the people and you just don't really have the proper processes in place because nobody's sat down to think about mapping it. And really, when you're small and trying to scale, like, you're the one that has to do the mapping. I remember going from, first year, I think I did 67,000 in sales. I did all the treatments. My second year in business, I grew to 250,000 in sales. And that's where I was just struggling to find. I hired somebody, young lady, and turns out she was zero help, and I ended up just getting her a bus ticket back home to, I think it was like Alabama, and I just was like, don't tell anybody you worked for me. I just like, let me just help you and you can go home. Then I went in as with somebody, another business owner, to share a office manager, and it was working okay, I guess, but then they just said, well, we need this person full time, so you have to find somebody else. So then I was left with nobody, and my stress level went through the roof. I think I lost like 20 pounds because I was so stressed out. I didn't have the stomach to eat, and because I just didn't know how I was going to get this work done. And when you're scaling, like, you reach a point where you're like, wow, I've built all the way to this point, and then you are just deathly afraid of losing it. It's like when you're a kid and you're at the top of a hill and you're riding your bike down, and the spokes are all not quite right, and the tire just starts wobbling and you can't stop, but at the same time it's wobbling really hard, and you're about to go flying over the handlebars. And that's the feeling that you have as you're growing the business and you don't have the things in place. And so, as I was going through that process, it was just, I think the temptation for everybody is like, you solve every problem with more people. Downside to that is like, you sacrifice your profit margins. And you just are trying to get everybody like, just work harder. And that's, and so then what you do is you just hire anybody, you have a pulse, like, awesome, I need you to do this. And so you end up building out this team, and you're trying to get the work done, and you have so much work you can't think about implementing a new system or changing a process. and sometimes changing the process involves changing the system. And those were all things that we experienced. And when I started out, like, it was a very paper-centric process. It's like the literal process was taking this piece of paper, setting it on this desk, moving over to the next desk. And it was just a very labor-intensive and fallible process. Somebody leaves a stack of 50 papers, like, those are customers that just didn't get serviced because we didn't know about them because the paper was buried on somebody's desk. So it's just really hard. And I think the like when we talk about losing your soul, I think every business owner has, generally speaking, they want to deliver good service. They want to do right by their customers. They're not looking to take advantage of people, and you're trying, you want to do all those things. But then as you're scaling, all of a sudden it's like things go out of control. And then to top it all off, it's super lonely. So you're doing this by yourself, trying to find people to help, and you're still growing, but it's getting to the point where you're about to lose it and everything's going to fall apart. And in the midst of all that, you've done all this hiring and your culture starts to degrade. So the things that you're aspirationally want to accomplish, all of a sudden you're like, this isn't what I want, but I just don't even have time to think about it because I just want to be able to say, like, hey, we did this, hey, it's done. And I think that's where the, potentially losing your soul in the business and, things just flying off the rails. So how do you deal with that? I think the part of it is really thinking through, like, what it is you're doing when you do have the time. I think as the business owner, you get so focused on the things that need to happen that day to keep things going that you never make the time to go, all right, and this is kind of like where the cliche is like, oh, you need to work on your business, not in your business. I mean, yeah, it's a cliche, but there is an element of truth to it. Like, that there isn't going to be anybody else that really looks at the systems, the processes, and the people like you, the owner. And being intentional about doing that is super important, and that's what's going to keep you from flying off the rails. So, when you're looking at, as you're scaling, you're looking at, like, all right, what's not going right, and how do you know, like, when there's a problem scaling? Well, the problem arises in that you're trying everything and you're not seeing growth. You're hiring people and it's like, oh, well, nothing happened. Or you feel like you're working all the time and yet, getting more business isn't going to, like, doesn't help. It actually becomes like, it feels problematic because it's like, oh, I've got more business. And, relating this to outdoor lighting, when I used to work in Pat's business as well, doing installations and design on my off days as a firefighter. One of the biggest challenges that we faced in that business was, failures of product and, performing service. So it's like every fixture luminaire that you installed was a phone call just waiting to happen 6 months, 9 months, year and a half down the road, to the point where, you didn't have enough money to pay more people to help you because there wasn't any more money left, but you still had more work that needed to get done, but you weren't making any more money. And part of that was a mispricing of what service actually costs because, generally speaking, small companies don't track that because they just don't have the manpower to track it. And so you don't know what service is actually costing you until you get to the end of the year, and then you look at your P&L and then you're like, I didn't really make any money. Like, what comes down to that is just like, is the misallocation of your resources for your employees. And, and so part of solving that problem was, the system implementation and being able to track what it is. And then, in that case, it's also a product issue. Like, how do we go from using 27 different products in the field and just get that down to 6 or 7 so that, service becomes easier. So that's just an example of, in the outdoor lighting arena, you can get stuck. Getting back to this, the question of, like, how do you know that you're stuck when you're trying to scale? You just hit a plateau. Like, we did it in my mosquito control company. We hit $3 million And then we bumped along, pushing up to like 3.8, and we just were stuck. Like, nothing, no lever that we were pulling was really changing the outcome. And so it was really about rethinking how we are, we have like, it's rethinking our systems, our processes, and our people. And that really is the difference of, because when you get stuck, and I think for outdoor lighting companies, what I've observed, you generally get stuck between, five and 600,000. You have 4 or 5 people on the business, but you just can't quite break into the $1 million mark. You can sit there for years and years and you're like, I am working so hard, but I'm not really moving the needle on the growth side. And that's discouraging. And so, because you just don't know, you've tried everything and you don't know what to do. That's where you really have to take a step back, take a look at your systems, your processes, your people. And when you think about people, as you scale, the competencies for a role change. And this is something that I think most of us, you don't really think about. You go like, okay, this person has been in this role, and as we're growing, you as the owner are adapting and changing. Your role is changing and you're adapting. The challenge becomes for your people that they need to do the same thing. And that's really, really hard because, as your employees are growing, seeing the growth, they don't really know what they're supposed to grow into. And so coaching them through that can be difficult. But that is one of the biggest hurdles to scaling is, you're growing, you start paying your people more, the role changes, and all of a sudden you have somebody whose competencies don't match the role anymore. And that's hard. Because you really only have 2 choices. You either, well, 3, you could demote them, but that never really goes over well. Demote, hire above them, but generally speaking, you don't have the money to hire an additional person. So then you have to replace them. So you're letting somebody go that's, probably been loyal and has done their best, but, they're not able to scale, or their competencies don't match where you're at in the business, or you train them, and you have to really get into that role, figure out what it needs to look like, what competency is missing, and then teach them and train them to grow into that. And that's hard because you have all of your work you have to do. But, when guys are, kind of stuck in that spot, generally speaking, the systems you implemented are probably okay. Just with the nature of, business now, there's so many SaaS applications and different CRMs, and, systems are pretty robust, at that size. Generally speaking, it's going to be that you're outgrowing the skill set and competencies of some of your key employees. And that's something really hard to think through. And there isn't anything wrong with just deciding like, hey, we just want to really improve efficiency and be the best we can be at this size. And there's nothing wrong with that. In time, like if you want to do that, like you might be able to kind of hit pause and then really improve your people and, work on the efficiency, and then go, all right, now we're ready. Let's try and grow again, because you've pulled your people and built them into the role that they need to be for the next stage. But if you're growing quickly, then you're looking at replacing people to go through the next stage. So, and that's really hard. That's a hard conversation. Getting back to like my original thought, like, how do you scale without losing your soul? You're balancing the needs of your company, the needs of your employees, and the needs of your customers. You're trying to do right by all of them. And I didn't come up with that. That's, I read that somewhere. But, when you balance those 3 things, it's like, that's what a good company does. Like you're trying, and if you really end up focusing on one of those and sacrifice the other 2, you're not really a good company anymore, because if you're not doing your customers right, you're not going to stay in business. If you treat your employees poorly, like you're not going to stay in business. And if you don't make sure that the company is profitable and maintains itself to be a going concern, you're not going to be a good company. So it's like you're balancing those 3 things as you scale, but also making hard decisions. It's like if if the company's not profitable, as the owner, you have to make hard decisions about restructuring things so that it is profitable. As the business owner, you have to, examine your people and see where they're lacking, where that you can improve training to kind of bring them up to speed, or making the hard call of saying, like, I need to let you go and then replace somebody. And then for your customers, you have to look at, like, well, what kind of service are you delivering in order to keep your employees and do your, make your profit margin. But to do that, you're sacrificing, the service or the installation that you're making. Like, you're not a good company anymore. And so you have to really stop and rethink it, like, what it is you're doing. One of the things that makes Sterling Lighting different, Patrick and I have been there and we've scaled our businesses. It's one of our passions is business, all of the things that go into it. It doesn't matter what the service is, what the product that you're selling. It's the passion for growing and scaling and using your creativity to solve problems. Like, we absolutely love that. We love seeing our customers succeed. We love the stories and the feedback that we get of how we've had an impact in their business and helped them grow and allowed them to be a blessing to their employees, to creatively solve problems and just see them grow as people. It's one of our passions. And so it's one of our priorities in Sterling Lighting, and it's why we chose a purpose that we wanted to pursue, which was elevating the outdoor lighting industry. And part of that is coming alongside people as they grow their businesses. Because when you're successful in growing your business, you're impacting your employees, you're impacting your family, you're impacting your community. We want to grow that. And it's one of the things that we get a lot of enjoyment is seeing people grow and businesses succeed. Those are some of my thoughts on scaling without losing your soul. I hope you found it helpful. Always happy to talk to any one of our customers and talk about my own experience, and hopefully you can learn something from me and not have to go through the trial and error yourself. But those are just a few of the things that I think about that. Thanks for watching.